Okay, it's 2 o'clock now, so the webinar will start. Please note that this webinar is recorded for possible later use by HyValue and FNE. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jonas Solbakken. I'm the center coordinator in the HyValue Research Center, which facilitates research, education, and innovation on hydrogen-related technologies and values for Norway. The center is funded by the Research Council of Norway and many dedicated partners from industry, public sector to academia. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the 5th webinar in this series, which we have called Meet the HyValue Research Partners. In this open to all webinar series, you will, through standalone webinars, get to know each HyValue research partner a bit better, including a broader overview of their research activities, competences, and capabilities, with particular emphasis on hydrogen-related aspects. You can read more about the HyValue Research Center on HyValue website, hyvalue.no. There you can also find our previous recorded webinars in this series. Today we will have a few selected presentations from our colleagues and research partners at FNE, the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, which is based and headquartered in Oslo. It is an independent foundation engaged in research on international politics and law, especially related to energy and environmental issues. The webinar today will include several presentations, including 5 to 10 minutes for questions and answers towards the end of the program. So please raise your questions in the chat option during the presentations, and the presenter will answer them on the screen towards the end of the program. So short about today's program, the first speaker out will be senior researcher Per Ove Eikeland, talking about energy transition research and hydrogen activities at FNE, and implementation of EU's hydrogen strategy, status, challenges, and opportunities. Per Ove will be followed by research professor Jan Birger Skjærseth, who will introduce you to Norway's hydrogen strategy and the EU. In the final presentation, researcher Mari Larsen will give a presentation about network capacity for the energy transition, which she is questioning could be the Achilles heel for implementing hydrogen. And with that, we will get started with the presentations. I will therefore give the word to Per Ove Eikeland, senior researcher at FNE and also a key person in the HyValue Research Center. So please, Per Ove, the microphone and screen are yours.
So like Jonas said, we are an independent foundation engaged in international research. You see the picture here. We are located in the home of Fridtjof Nansen at Polhøgda, outside Oslo. We do research in 7 different thematic areas: global environmental governance and law, climate change, law of the sea and marine affairs, biodiversity and genetic resources, polar and Russian politics, European energy environment, and Chinese energy and the environment. We're about 60 persons working here. 50 persons. We engage in about 60 projects. We have scholarships and guest researchers, a turnover of approximately 46 million Norwegian kroner. And the main sources of finance is the Research Council of Norway, government ministries, businesses, private foundations, the EU, and international institutions. Within the Environment Programme of Europe, the European Programme, we do EU transition policy and implementation studies, comparative studies in various national contexts in Europe, including Norway, corporate transition studies, And we have also dealt a lot with technology diffusion studies, specifically on hydrogen, CCS, wind and solar power, biofuels, etc. The role in HyValue, we are partner in the World Package 6 together with NHH, University of Bergen, the Transport Economic Institute, and international partners. The specific research focus for FNI is to understand and explain the evolving policy frameworks to promote supply chains and a market for hydrogen in Europe. We will do and have done studies of implementation of EU hydrogen strategy, studies of implementation and coupling of national hydrogen strategies through policy and industrial value chain developments, with a focus on North Sea countries, including Norway. And the main research questions we do in our research is to what extent are policies coordinated vertically and horizontally in Europe to promote a European market for hydrogen? And under what conditions may policy and industrial development coordination be improved to promote diffusion of hydrogen? So to my main presentation today, to give you a status on the implementation of EU's hydrogen strategy and a bit on challenges and opportunities for the EU and Norway. So the plan is first to give a presentation of the hydrogen strategy, the drivers and the developments we see for this strategy. Then the status of implementation in the form of EU regulatory and financial instruments adopted, and some challenges and opportunities ahead for EU and Norway. So an important driver of the European hydrogen strategy is its goal to transition the energy system. It started back in 2009, we may say, with the first package of policies towards 2020, adopted then. They set targets for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, and for cut in greenhouse gases by 2020. These targets were reached in 2020, and in the period 2020 to 2023, they started, or even started before this, but then they kind of established the goals and targets to continue the transition towards 2030 under the so-called European Green Deal package of policies. And the new goals for 2030 is 55% cut in greenhouse gases, 42% share of renewables, and 11.7% cut in energy consumption compared to 2020 and the reference scenario of 2020. And that will lead to 2050 when the EU has set the goal to be a net zero economy. So the European hydrogen strategy was adopted in 2020 as part of the Green Deal package. It set a target of 10 million tons of green hydrogen to be produced in Europe by 2030. Hydrogen was seen as a necessary element of the transition for flexible energy storage in a system based increasingly on intermittent solar and wind power, to decarbonize existing hydrogen production based in reformation of natural gas, and to decarbonize sectors hard to abate with direct electricity, such as steel and parts of the transport sector. In 2022, the EU adopted the Repower EU policy package to accelerate transition and phase out Russian gas in response to security of supply concerns aggravated by gas market turmoil caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Adopted were up-adjusted targets for renewables, energy efficiency, and hydrogen by 2030. An additional 10 million tons of hydrogen would be imported to the EU by this date. Then in 2023 came new proposed changes to EU's hydrogen strategy, this time in response to competitiveness concerns for European green technology manufacturing industries. a direct response to the massive subsidies of such industries adopted in the USA by the Inflation Reduction Act and increasing dominance of China in control of strategic raw materials and manufacturing capacity for key energy technologies, including manufacturing of electrolyzers. Commission proposed Net Zero Industry Act, now negotiated among the decision makers, include a target that 40% of key energy technologies, including electrolyzers, should be produced in Europe. Now to implementation of the hydrogen strategy. Implementation is done through packages of proposed and adopted directives and regulations, like Fit for 55 and the Net Zero Industry Act, the industrial strategy. In policy making, EU has focused on development of whole value chains to avoid the chicken and egg syndrome. That is, to coordinate the introduction of policy instruments to prevent that poor development of some elements of the value chain will hinder other elements from developing. Policy implementation first includes regulations to define what is considered renewable and low carbon hydrogen production. Such definitions are included in several directives and regulations. Under the Renewable Energy Directive, rules are established to define renewable hydrogen production. Included is a requirement of electrolysis-based production to not be based on power from the grid, but additional new renewable energy production. Principle of additionality may be avoided if a country has more than 90% power production within a bidding zone. Then hydrogen production located there will be considered renewable. Norway and Sweden are among the few countries that fulfill this definition. Concerning low-carbon hydrogen and derived fuels, the Commission has adopted another delegated act under the Renewable Energy Directive stating a threshold of minimum 70% greenhouse gas emission savings from the use of recycled carbon fuels. That includes blue hydrogen. This threshold will now be incorporated in other relevant legislation, such as the still negotiated Directive on Internal Markets in Renewable and Natural Gases and in hydrogen, and the broader EU taxonomy regulation. Relevant policy implementation next include regulations aimed at increasing demand for low carbon solutions, including hydrogen. Here, the EU has already adopted a revision of Emissions Trading Directive as a technology neutral instrument and driver of demand for low carbon solutions, with annual cut decided in total available emissions allowances aimed at increasing carbon prices. New is that also the maritime sector is included. Shipping companies must gradually phase in the purchase of allowances, 40% in 2025, increasing to 100% from 2027. While industry competing in the world market has been granted free allowances and compensation for indirect costs from the system, that is, impact on electricity prices, such compensation will be gradually phased out and replaced by a carbon border adjustment mechanism, where importers of specific goods, including hydrogen, must confirm that a price has been paid for the embedded carbon emissions generated in the production of these imported goods, equivalent to the carbon price of domestic production. A proposal is under discussion for revising the directive on minimum energy taxes, with higher tax rates on fossil fuels, phase out of exemptions, including air and maritime transport, to complement the EU ETS and other sector-specific regulations, and thus promote uptake of low-carbon solutions, including hydrogen. This proposal is controversial since the EU does not have competency in fiscal matters and any agreement is still not reached. However, the EU has now adopted several directives that specify binding targets for use of green hydrogen by 2030 for industry and transport. The newly adopted Renewable Energy Directive set up the target that 42% of hydrogen used by industry must be green hydrogen by 2030. 1% of road transport fuels must be green hydrogen. Member of Parliament recently adopted the Refuel EU aviation rules, obliging EU airports and fuel suppliers to ensure that, starting from 2025, at least 2% of aviation fuels will be green, with the share increasing every 5 years. 6% in 2030 to reach 70% in 2050. In addition, a specific proportion of the fuel mix, 1.2% in 2030, 2% in 2032, 5% in 2035, reaching 35% in 2050, must comprise synthetic fuels like hydrogen. This will apply if the Council also approves these latest amendments. The maritime sector, the Fuel EU Maritime Regulation mandates a gradual reduction in carbon intensity of energy consumed on board vessels, 2% for January 2025, and increasing to 80% cut in carbon intensity by 2050. Concerning infrastructure for hydrogen, 65 hydrogen projects have very recently been proposed, listed as projects of common interest and projects of mutual interest under the Trans-European Energy Infrastructure Regulation. These projects are eligible for some funding from the Connecting Europe facility. Listed projects are based on mapping work of the European gas transmission system operators, the so-called European hydrogen backbone. An offshore hydrogen pipeline between Norway and Germany is among the hydrogen projects recently added to the list. Moreover, the newly adopted Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation sets specific targets for electricity charging and hydrogen refueling stations on roads that are listed in the EU's Trans-European Network Transport regulations. Much focus is on road transport infrastructure, but with additional requirements for electric charging at ports and airports, and national reporting obligations on how they will provide hydrogen refueling infrastructure more broadly. I will finally mention the revised gas market legislation, which aims at promoting access to infrastructure for renewable gases, including hydrogen. This directive is still not formally adopted. It contains gradual phase-in of unbundling rules to ensure development of a competitive hydrogen market, as well as rules on how much hydrogen may be blended with natural gas in existing pipelines. Now, EU policy instruments is not only regulatory, but also include financial instruments. These will be needed for the massive investments that is required to reach energy transition and hydrogen targets. The EU has over the past 20 years evolved its role as not only as regulator, but as a facilitator of transition through provision of project financing programs, some of them targeting the funding of hydrogen projects. Commenting a bit on the table here, which gives an overview of EU financial instruments. The main sources of EU finance is first the multi-annual budget, next specific loan-based funding established for recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic, later decided applicable also to fund the energy transition. And there are now 15 EU countries that have decided to allocate recovery funds to hydrogen projects. A next important source of funding are revenues from the sales of EU emissions allowances. Finally, EU state support guidelines have been softened to mobilize product support by the EU member states, including for so-called IPCEI projects. From these funding sources, the EU has set up various funding programs and mechanisms with specific calls for funding of hydrogen projects. To mention a few examples, several calls under the Horizon Europe program have targeted hydrogen technology R&D and establishment of regional hydrogen clusters, so-called hydrogen valleys, with more to come. Investments in more mature hydrogen projects have been supported in several calls from the Innovation Fund. From this fund, the European Commission is now setting up a new hydrogen funding facility called the European Hydrogen Bank to support investments via auctioning. Finally, 2 calls for hydrogen projects on the IPCEI mechanism have so far been carried out, with 2 Norwegian projects granted support by Enova. Here, I would like to announce a new HyValue webinar organized together with NHH, University of Bergen and Fridtjof Nansen Institute on the 23rd of January 2024, focused on the financing of hydrogen, where a representative of the European Commission will give a more detailed presentation of EU funding programs of relevance. To first sum up, the EU has so far delivered quite extensively on coordinated implementation of policy instruments focused on incentives and support of a complete value chain for hydrogen. However, there are still many challenges ahead for EU to achieve its hydrogen ambitions. First, technological challenges along the supply chain are numerous to make clean hydrogen a safe and low-emission solution. Extensive R&D is needed, where the HyValue Centre will contribute to develop new, more cost-efficient solutions. A closely associated challenge concerns raising sufficient funding of research, innovation, and final investments in clean hydrogen value chains, in new renewable electricity production, and in establishing a value chain for carbon capture and storage in Europe, a prerequisite for promoting blue hydrogen. Not least, the EU faces various political decision challenges ahead. A crucial issue will be how to redistribute risks, costs and benefits of the massive necessary investments for realizing the hydrogen ambition. With European consumers already facing high energy prices and poverty on the rise, additional cost-induced rise in energy prices may cause serious political trouble. There is need to find an acceptable distribution of burdens among industries, consumers, private and public funding. Another crucial political challenge concerns further policy development in a period of geoeconomic and geopolitical tensions. Today, there is a clear trade-off between lower cost imports of technology, energy, and achieving European energy resilience at higher costs. How the EU will position itself in global technology trade policies towards China and the United States is currently a contentious political issue splitting the member states. Moreover, an important issue is how to manage technology acceptance challenges and trade-off between nature and climate concerns. We may expect major area management conflicts across Europe associated with investments needed for developing European energy technology value chains as part of the transition. Norwegian politicians and industry have acted on opportunities provided for by new EU and national policies to make hydrogen part of Europe's energy transition. Norway is in a good position to take a role in development of hydrogen by superior access to public funding that may leverage investments by industry. On the other hand, we see political conflicts emerging over what transition projects to leverage by use of public funds. To what extent hydrogen projects will be given continued priority support by Norwegian politicians is still an open question. Moreover, Norway has strong competences in development of both green and blue hydrogen and superior renewable energy resources developed in industry able to participate in the emerging European hydrogen market. Norway has strong cooperative links with Europe, is currently considered a reliable partner, and is deeply integrated with the EU transition through the EEA agreement and bilateral agreements. However, there are numerous political challenges ahead, as revealed by past years' contentious political discussions concerning accelerated investments in renewable energy, electrification of industry, and further integration with the European energy market. I now leave the floor to my colleague Jon Birger Skjærseth, who will give a presentation of the Norwegian hydrogen strategy in a comparative perspective with that of the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention.
So my name is Jon Birger Skjærseth. I'm a political scientist working as a research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute. And my field of kind of study and expertise is related to European energy and climate policies and international environmental cooperation. Today I will talk about Norway's hydrogen strategy and the EU and focus on similarities and differences and overlaps between Norway's strategy and the EU. My presentation is based on a published report and an upcoming book chapter, which is a part of a comparative study of hydrogen strategies in European countries. And our chapter, my presentation is based on this chapter, which is prepared together with good colleagues at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, including Per Ove, as we heard, Tor Håkon Inneberg, and also Mari Li Larsen, who will be the next speaker. Okay, so first I will kind of provide a snapshot of Norway's hydrogen strategy, followed then by some words about the strategy of the EU. Then I will zoom in on some similarities and differences between these strategies. The big picture is actually one of mutual dependence between Norway and the EU. I will get back to that. And at the end, I will draw some conclusions. Okay, starting then, so compared to Per Ove's presentation, I will kind of follow a more bottom-up approach from Norway to the EU. As you may know, Norway has a long hydrogen history dating back to the 1920s, but I will do a great jump to the Conservative government's release of its hydrogen strategy in 2020, or more correctly, low carbon hydrogen strategy, and the roadmap that followed a year later. I will not be able to go into any detail here, but I will try to cut to the core of these documents because there are a lot of words, and it's not that easy to kind of capture the core. So when it comes to the purpose of Norway's low carbon strategy, it is clearly a combination of industry development, innovation on the one hand, and to cut the greenhouse gas emissions on the other hand. But I will say in that order, because if you look at Norway's plans to cut the greenhouse gas emissions, at least before 2030, low carbon hydrogen is not very important. When it comes to types of hydrogen focused in this strategy, it is a combination of green based on renewables and electrolysis, and blue based on natural gas and carbon capture and storage. So Norway has kind of adopted a technology neutral approach to low carbon hydrogen, and that is quite different from most other European countries. Concerning sectors, the two sectors prioritized by Norway is maritime transport, end use sectors, and energy intensive process industries. The kind of background for these priorities are the energy mix in Norway, industry structure, and also technological know-how. This roadmap consists of a number of targets. The roadmap that followed a year after the strategy, both in the short and long term, but it has a quite ambitious long-term target that Norway should be a world-leading exporter of hydrogen by 2050. And then I guess it's mainly about related to blue hydrogen. A number of policies adopted in Norway will affect the diffusion of hydrogen technologies, including, of course, carbon pricing. But two important ones are public procurement standards applied to long-distance ferry boats, and of course, state aid to hydrogen projects, to pilot projects, demonstration projects from innovation to market. The industry itself has been asking for contracts of difference, which has not been adopted yet politically. Okay, so then we have the strategy of a significant new effort related to low carbon hydrogen, and now we can see in retrospect what this has led to. And if you look at state aid in Norway over the last years, two kind of observations are striking. The first is a significant increase in hydrogen spending from 2020. And the second is significantly more to maritime transport and industry and less to road transport. And as we know, Norway does not have a kind of vehicle or car manufacturing industry. So at this very general level, it seems like at least the spending of state aid follows the strategy of 2020. Okay. Just some examples then from the maritime sector of how this money are used. There are now at least two signed contracts for hydrogen ferry boats to run at, I think, minimum 85% hydrogen or ammonia. There may be more. Enova, the state fund for transition, has supported a number of larger vessels to run on hydrogen or ammonia, around 15, 16, I think. Enova has also supported 5 hydrogen hubs along the coast. But still, investment decisions are lacking, and no hydrogen or ammonia boats are on the water, as far as I know. This is, of course, related to a perceived high risk involved, which in turn may be related to the costs of low carbon hydrogen. But now Enova has adopted new support schemes, hydrogen in vessels and ammonia in vessels that will be based on so-called competitive bidding and focus more on the demand side of this to try to get this going. Okay. Per Ove said also a bit about the EU's hydrogen strategy. The starting point here is December 2019, when Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, launched the European Green Deal. Also an important part of her election campaign for that position. And the Green Deal was from the beginning planned to be based on green economic growth related to both climate targets and environmental goals in general. It was actually criticized for that, but I think most agree in retrospect that it was kind of a handy choice, because just a short time after this we got the COVID-19 and then the Russian invasion. So this focus on growth was I think in retrospect a good choice. The Green Deal is actually based on 49 different measures, a lot of them relevant to Norway also through the EEA agreement. And many of these measures are related to net zero industries in EU language, concerning batteries, offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and of course low carbon or clean hydrogen. The EU then launched its hydrogen strategy in the summer of 2020, and this was then a part it formed a part of this broader European Green Deal and a part of this kind of industry niche within the Green Deal. The purpose of the EU's hydrogen strategy looks quite similar to Norway's, but it is also quite different. The purpose for the EU is also a combination of climate and industry development, but climate and reduction of greenhouse gases is more important to the EU, simply because the level of electrification in the EU is much lower than in Norway. When it comes to types of hydrogen, the EU focuses on green hydrogen and aims to be a world-leading producer of green hydrogen in the future. The EU has stated that it can accept blue hydrogen as a transitional mode of production. And as you may know, the EU has now decided to cut long-term gas contracts after 2049. So it has always had this kind of reluctance to the continuation of both gas and oil. When it comes to sectors, the EU focuses on hard-to-abate sectors like Norway, industry, heavy transport, but the EU has also a much broader or wider focus related to energy storage, to power production, and so on. As Per-Ove said, the target in the hydrogen strategy is a production of 10 million tons annually by 2030. And then in February 2022, we got the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, which the EU responded to by the Repower Plan to make the EU independent of Russian fossil fuels, particularly natural gas. So the Repower Plan focuses on renewables, energy efficiency, gas storage, and so on, but also on clean hydrogen. So on top of this 10 million tons annual production, the Repower Plan also aims to add 10 million tons annual imports to the EU by 2030. So this can be interpreted as a kind of redefinition of climate policies as energy security policy, but at the same time, of course, this creates a new energy dependence for the EU. But in contrast to Norway, where hydrogen may be important for reducing greenhouse gases mainly after 2030, it will be extremely important for the EU to achieve its 55% reduction target by 2030. And this relates mainly to the energy-intensive industries, which is now under or constrained by the EU emissions trading system. Okay. If you compare these strategies then, Norway and the EU has a shared focus on low-carbon hydrogen, but there are differences, as I talked about, concerning the purpose of the strategies, types of hydrogen focused, end-use sectors, at least the scope of end-use sectors, and also the targets. Still, I think the main thing here is that there is increasingly a mutual dependence between export-oriented Norway and import-oriented EU. If you look at the EU's importance to Norway, a European market is of course extremely important for Norway to realize this export-oriented strategy, and a EU regulatory framework is under development. If you look at Norway's importance for the EU, Norway's export ambitions and import of hydrogen is important for the EU, and Norway has plans for large-scale export of blue hydrogen. And this, the most concrete kind of expression of this is a number of energy and industrial deals that have been agreed between Norway and the EU and Norway and Germany on so-called net zero industries, where hydrogen will play an important role. Okay, to wrap up then, so Norway and the EU has a shared focus on low-carbon hydrogen, but still there are differences concerning purpose, types, sectors, and targets. There is a mutual dependence between export-oriented Norway and import-oriented EU. I have not talked about uncertainties involved here, so I will end by just underlining that there are significant uncertainties, particularly related to blue hydrogen, concerning competitiveness, costs, infrastructure, market, transport, safety, not least sustainability related to methane emissions, and so on. And as far as I know, Norway has not produced any blue hydrogen yet. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jon Birger, for the presentation. Just a reminder that you can raise your questions in the chat option, and we will answer the question at the end of the program. So we continue now with Mari. Mari, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jonas. So I'll just share my screen here. So now I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, good. So hello, everyone. My name is Mari Larsen, and I work as a researcher at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute and participate in the HyValue project. My background is in geophysics and technology management, and I've been working in the oil industry for about 10 years before I started as a researcher at FNI. I will now go through some results from a study me and my colleague Kendra Dupuy have conducted, where we investigated how and to what extent access to the power grid affects the establishment of new green industries in Norway. In addition to document analysis, we interviewed representatives from industry parks, new green industry actors, grid companies, and industry organizations. The interviews and analysis were conducted in late 21, early 22, and since then network capacity have gained increasing attention. And both the Strømnettutvalget and the Energikommisjonen have published reports, namely Nett I tide and Mer av alt raskere. However, despite the apparent simplicity suggested by the report title, it still remains uncertain and unclear how issues related to insufficient network capacity will be resolved. So, the demand for electricity has recently increased, and it's mainly due to three reasons. Firstly, Norway needs to reduce emissions in existing industries to meet climate goals. This includes electrifying parts of the transport sector, land-based industry, and petroleum industry. And various measures, including CO2 taxes and Kyoto prices, are driving this transition. And secondly, Norway aims to contribute to the green shift by establishing new green industries that can reduce emissions in other sectors while maintaining economic growth. And thirdly, Norway has a power system based on 100% renewable energy, with prices that have generally been lower than those in surrounding countries. This has made Norway highly attractive to international actors looking to reduce their carbon footprint. And for example, Norway is one of few countries where green hydrogen, as defined by the European Commission, can be produced using power from the grid. So, a few years ago, the newspapers and media were abuzz with news of many stakeholders eager to contribute to the green transition. Both existing industries and new players announced ambitious plans. Like battery factories and Google were underway, ferries, land-based agriculture, and large-scale green hydrogen production in places like Porsgrunn, Mongstad, Mosjøen, Narvik, and Finnmark. Investors were lining up, and there was a great sense of enthusiasm. This led to a significant increase in demand for grid access. Between 2018 and 2020, Statnett received application for 14,300 megawatts of new consumption. And this is equivalent to almost 40% of the current production capacity. Except for significant offshore wind plants, there are no corresponding plans for new power generation. And the map to the right provides a somewhat cluttered representation of various projects and decide capacity. The increased competition has been observed in all electricity market areas, even in North, where there's generally been electricity surplus and lower prices. There's no intense competition for the available capacity. And on the West Coast as well, there's been a struggle between electrifying the petroleum industry and providing power for new green industries. And increased competition and capacity constraints are crucial today in almost all regions for the establishment of new green industries and projects, and particularly along the coast and in areas with established industrial parks. So hydrogen also contribute to this rising demand. According to the Norwegian Hydrogen Forum, there are 59 planned hydrogen production projects spread all around the country. It's shown by the red dot on the map to the right. According to these plans, there is a projected production capacity of 687 megawatt in 2025, with 667 attributed to renewable hydrogen production, green hydrogen production. And by year 2030, there's planned production capacity of 6,610 megawatts by renewable hydrogen production. And electrolysis processes can have varying efficiencies, but if we assume an average efficiency of around 70 to 80%, it means that to produce 1 megawatt of green hydrogen, you would need more than 1.25 megawatt of electricity. And although that the primary energy source to produce blue hydrogen is natural gas, electricity is also essential for various processes and equipment such as compressors, pumps, control system, and etc. And for both type, green and blue hydrogen production, electricity is necessary for the subsequent processing of hydrogen, including compression or liquefaction. So access to the grid for an industry actor depends not only on available capacity. Those wishing to connect to the power grid must submit an application to the responsible grid company, which is obliged to provide access to the grid to anyone who requests it, as long as it is socially rational. So the grid companies receive and process connection applications. Increased demand from the customers has led to a growing pressure and a new situation for the grid companies. Like in 2016, Statnett received only 5 such applications, while in 2021, this had increased to 172. So if the grid company does not have available capacity for the customer, there exists a queue system. Increasing demand has made it essential to secure a place in the queue. But two seemingly contradictory principles govern the allocation of power or place in the queue. Firstly, there is the first come, first served principle, meaning that all customers should be treated equally and connections should be provided in the order they apply. However, grid companies must also assess whether the project has sufficient maturity to determine how likely it is that it's going to be established and also its progress. And so far, there has been no clear guidelines for how the grid companies should assess the project's maturity. Therefore, these assessments are mostly subjective, and the criteria used may vary from one grid company to another. And the information used by the grid companies to rank the new projects varies, but can include factors such as the type of business, the timing of investment decision and construction start, public permits, project planning milestones, project phase, and financing plans. Additionally, it may involve evaluating the owners of the projects and whether the plans involve mature or immature technology. And the definition of mature or immature technology is not explicitly mentioned. So in theory, grid companies could prioritize certain projects or customer groups over others based on factors like whether the technology being used is considered mature or immature. And for the from the customer's perspective, it's pointed out that there was a very little information available, both about available capacity, the application process, evaluation criteria, the queue system, and how long all of this would take. A major new customer in green industry highlighted that it took them nearly 2 years actually to figure out how to apply correctly as who was the correct recipient. It was also mentioned that existing customers from established industries who had experience with the application process from before and also had the right connections often had advantage over new customers regarding the connection process. And another issue that is widely discussed is the time horizon. An investor would ideally want to make investment decision within 1 to 4 years, while access to the grid can take anywhere from 7 to 15 years. So recently, there hasn't been the same boom vibe. Many projects have been put to hold. And according to an industry actor we spoke with, he lost 2,400 potential jobs due to a prolonged and messy process of accessing the grid. And many investors are now looking to invest abroad instead. And for the hydrogen production projects, only 8 out of the 59 projects have reached final investment decision, while the remaining is still in the planning phase. While the lack of electricity access may contribute, it's probably not the sole factor affecting limited progress of these projects. However, as we've seen from Denmark this week, access to renewable electricity is significantly impacting the establishment of green hydrogen production there, as with Ørsted's planned facility. Ørsted's facility aimed to become the world's largest producer of green fuels. And upon full development, the factory will boost an electrolysis capacity of 1.3 gigawatts. But the project is currently in severe crisis due to a shortage of renewable energy. So, in summary, grid connection can play a crucial role in influencing the development of hydrogen value chain in Norway. The establishment and choice of location of hydrogen plants are influenced by increased competition for connection, greater pressure on the grid companies, unclear rule for grid access, a discretionary and non-transparent process for prioritization and connection, and also a lengthy and costly connection process. Grid measures have long lead time, while consumption has a shorter lead time. So we may need clearer plans, regulations, and more transparency in how prioritization of different industries and area is done. What criteria should be considered? And also, should this involve more political consideration and not be left to the individual grid companies to decide? So as far as renewable energy is a limited resource, Norway needs to achieve its climate goals, protect the environment, and promote value creation. So there's still be a long way to go. So thank you for the attention.
Okay, so then I think we are at the end of this webinar. I cannot see any questions in the chat. Well, we have a question. It is to Jon Birger. Jon Birger, in the research on renewable energy systems, hydrogen fuel has a dual purpose of both 1, decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, and 2, providing access to long-term storage and access wind and solar energy. In this context, blue hydrogen falls short on delivering on point number 2. Do EU policies and strategies include this consideration in their priority of green hydrogen?
I'm not sure I kind of understood the question, but as I said, the focus of the EU has been green hydrogen. It has been very reluctant to blue hydrogen, but that changed after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and this was of course also related to the energy crisis created in Europe because of the cut in gas supplies from Russia. So the EU is not. The EU is now kind of accepts the fact that since it has this target of importing 10 million tons of low carbon hydrogen, this will also include blue hydrogen from Norway if it becomes available. but in its kind of regulations and policy developments, and also related to the additionality principle in the Renewable Energy Directive, the focus of the EU is green hydrogen. I don't know whether that was a good answer, but maybe I didn't understand the question.
Okay, thank you. Just a question from my side. What is the latest status on contracts of difference in Norway that you have heard about?
The latest status is that it seems like it's kind of coming soon, but as far as I know, it has not been adopted, and it has not been adopted now in relation to the revised state budget, which did not focus much on hydrogen at all. So I really don't know. There seems to be a reluctance towards kind of closing this gap between grey and low carbon hydrogen by subsidies in this way. So I don't know more than it's not there.
Good, thank you. Any more questions? Please raise them in the chat now. Søren is thanking for the answer, Jon Birger. My point was that blue hydrogen cannot be used as storage for wind energy. Electrolyzers can do that. I was wondering if this plays a role in EU's priorities.
Not as far as I know. I think what plays a role in EU's priorities is its focus on the phasing out all kinds of fossil fuels by 2050. And you can see this discussion now is lifted to the COP28 that started today, I think, where we have this discussion between these or the alliances and countries that want to phase out coal, those that want to phase out all fossil fuels, and those that want to phase down fossil fuels. And it kind of parts, at least important parts of the EU, works very hard to get in formulations related to a phase out of fossil fuels, but has added this phase out unabated fossil fuels. And that, of course, may open for blue hydrogen because it is related to carbon capture and storage. So it's in a way abated. But for the EU, it's this blue hydrogen thing is kind of chipping into this big discussion about the future of fossil fuels. But it's important to note now that with this new gas and hydrogen package that is negotiated these days, or it's almost finished, and I think there is a general agreement that long-term gas contracts will be phased out after 2049, and of course that will have also implications for the future of blue hydrogen, as far as I understand.
Okay. Thank you for that. I see Per Ove is there, but can you hear us? No, we cannot hear you. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so then we are at the end of this webinar. We are out of time. I want to thank the entire team at FNE, especially Per Ove, who helped me putting this together. And I also want to thank Jon Birger and Mari, who all play a central role within research on energy transition at FNE, but also within the HyValue Research Centre. So we apologize again for the audio issues, but that's how it is. Our next webinar in this series is scheduled to January 12th. Then it will be the Institute of Transport Economics in Norway going to host this seminar in relation to their hydrogen research activities. So please stay tuned. Thank you everybody for today. have a great afternoon, and all the best. Goodbye.
Thank you.